Do y'all know what dissonance is?
It's a rap.
It's a what?
It's a rap.
A rap? Okay. It probably is. I don't know. So in music, dissonance is kind of the opposite of consonance. And consonance requires at least two different pitches. And when they're played together, you get this kind of pleasant sound. Right? Now, you can add more than two pitches and still get kind of a pleasant sound. That's a little bit more pleasant maybe than, but that's still technically consonant because it's just sad. But that's happy. Now, dissonance, though, is like when you combine two seemingly unpleasant sounds together. I like. You know what that is? It's a famous soap opera theme song. But it starts off with this dissonance, which is a minor second. And there's even worse dissonances. There's which is the augmented fourth, which was known as the devil in music back in the medieval times. It's also the Simpsons. So sometimes I wish it were just that simple, that consonance could just be consonance and dissonance could just be dissonance. But it's not quite that simple because, well, it's just not. To say that it's that simple is to overestimate our grasp of the truth. Because in some contexts, things that sounded dissonant when it was just a very narrow view becomes quite different. So I want to play that terrible dissonance for you, but I want to put that into a different context, okay? So here's our context. Now, did that bother you nearly so much that time? That was still in there, though. But it was in there in this way right here. So we had the 6 grinding against that flat 7 scale degree, but we did it in the context of having a 2 and a 4 and a 2 and a 4. So we get this, all that hath life and breath, praise ye the Lord. So, isn't that cool? I think that's cool. Thank you. Have you ever seen this TV show called Breaking Bad where the guy rings the bell for yes or no? Okay. I think maybe I'm done with this. Yes. Patton saw Breaking Bad. You should not watch it. It is not a consonant television show. Obviously I'm talking about more than just musical dissonance. I'm bringing up this idea of dissonance because it's like us. It's like human beings. It's like Ellie was talking about this morning. We are a dissonant bunch of people, and we know that there are evils and things that are absolutely dissonant without question. And yet somehow, we also know that our anger toward those evils does not work out the righteousness of God, right? This is what Scripture tells us. I wish you all could have sat with me in this back room when I interviewed Ellie a few weeks ago for one of my classes. I'm selling it on eBay, this interview. Do you want to split the profits with me, or?
We can talk a little.
Okay. I probably should have run it by you before I put it online. So, like this, I could try to harmonize with it, though. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm out of time. Thanks for coming this morning. So these things that we're talking about are arguable. We have these experiences of arguing for what is or isn't a dissonance. We're not always aware of what is or isn't a dissonance. Some things we probably are right about, some things we might not be right about because our context isn't big enough yet. So there's a reason that James, later on in our lectionary today, brings up the word meekness, because meekness is the condition that enables you and me to receive the implanted word that is able to save us. But boy, do we struggle with meekness. We live in a world that kind of hates meekness, and it can lead us to hate meekness too. One example, out at the baseball field or the soccer field, probably 90% of those people in this town are Christians, right? They go to church. They teach on Sunday. And yet, well, they teach something, Sunday school, maybe they're pastors, maybe they're just teaching their kids not to listen to the pastor, I don't know. But they're teaching something on Sunday. And yet, they're happy with the referee making an obviously wrong call if it favors their team, right? Of course they are. Of course they are. We're all like, well, he makes bad calls both ways. And he does, and it's true, but why are we happy about it? It's one thing to state the fact. It's another thing to be like, you know? And can you imagine what would happen if a player on the field dared to stop the ref and correct them and give up a point that was awarded wrongly? Can you even imagine the existential crisis that the people in the stands would have? They would lose their minds, these good Christians who are going to go teach at church on Sunday. They would lose their minds. This is a dissonance, or at least it seems to be, from the things that we are going to be teaching on Sunday morning. So I'm not going to make too hard of a connection here between meekness and behavior, but obviously it's something that we need to be thinking about. Like, does our culture celebrate meekness? Of course it doesn't. And what happens to our view of God when we give meekness lip service on Sunday morning, but then we live the rest of our life as if meekness is the biggest joke the world has ever known? When we shame meekness. Now, here's your favorite. Bill loves it when I put politics up on the screen. I can actually see the veins start to pop out right there. Because he's got no idea where I'm going with this. I am not the only person who can say what I'm about to say, but here it comes. I have some friends who are very liberal. I work at Murray State University, so give me a break. They're so liberal that they would make a conservative culture warrior lose their minds every time. I don't have the luxury of losing my mind because I work at Murray State University. So I have to get along with liberals. In fact, there's a lot of people who would say that I'm a liberal, even though I don't believe that's true at all. And there are a lot of people who would say I'm a conservative, even though I don't see that I don't try to get my identity out of politics. That's another dissonance that I don't understand. I don't understand it. But I've been told by 90% of the people at the soccer field that I got to pick a team. And I'm like, or what? What are you going to do? I, of course, have my opinions. And I, of course, believe that there are things that are absolute. But I don't see it in a one-dimensional line where I must plot myself. And I sure as heck don't want my children to believe that they have to plot themselves on a line that's defined by the evening news. Please don't do that. I mean, kids, the world is bigger. The gospel is bigger than what we see plotted for us as choices on social media or the evening news. So I've got friends on both sides, and both of my groups of friends, conservative or liberal, would drive the others absolutely crazy. Like, intolerably can't be around those people. I have seen one of my liberal friends at Murray State who is supposed to act like the poster child for all things that are wrong with our world, according to my conservative friends. I've seen them demonstrate a willingness to have extremely direct and uncomfortable discussions about things that we don't touch. We don't touch because it's just too hot to handle. And we better be right about that, because if we're wrong, we have stayed away from something that people should have heard about at some point before they hit 30 years old. I hope we're right. These people have handled it with grace, and they've handled it with honesty, and they've handled it with self-reflection. And I have heard people say things that I never thought I would hear from anybody, Christian or otherwise. Like, I want to be honest with myself about what the Bible says. I don't want to fool myself. I've heard that said by people we would call flaming liberals. Now, here's my favorite. On the flip side, I have some conservative friends who threatened to be here this morning, and then they decided not to because they got something else going on. Who are, they're supposed to act the opposite. They're supposed to be the poster child for all that's wrong with the world, according to my liberal friends, right? I'm talking about public AR-15 toting, court square statue defending, right-wing demonstrating conservatives. I've seen these people give an honest-to-God compliment to a transgender person about how nice they looked in a dress. Now, you tell me that's not dissonance. The dude with the AR-15 in front of the statue, being honest about that, it's going to make your head explode. That's not supposed to happen. Human beings aren't supposed to be that complicated. We're supposed to be very easy to understand. We're either this or we're that, and we always stay in our lanes. We don't surprise anybody. Nobody thinks any differently than what we've been told to think about people that are different from us. But we do. We think differently. We're not just this or this. I've been wildly impressed by people on both extremes because they will surprise you, because turns out people are more complicated than we give us credit for being. People are deeper and more important than we tend to give other people credit for being, even when they're wrong. If you live your life through social media, you've probably been told that that's impossible. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. But if we have an agenda that is the gospel, it forces us to expand our view and start looking for something that is not just a one-dimensional left and right argument, but one that puts God above both of those things every single time. I understand we have biases, and I understand we undoubtedly feel like, well, on average, I get that. I get that we feel certain things on average. But the danger with that is that we don't just stop at saying that. We tend to keep drifting one direction or the other. And those agendas that aren't the gospel, they grow in our hearts and in our minds and in our lives. And pretty soon, we've got something that doesn't look like the gospel at all. And it's easy, I think, to live as if this world is the prize. Like, I wonder how much income is going to be enough for my family. I worry that my kids might struggle to make a living in this economy when they are ready to start working and moving out. I'm tempted to run away from these concerns by getting lost in recreations or anything that I can take my mind off of it. But the finished work of Christ is the perfected me and the perfected you. And we can't receive that truth when our own weaknesses overshadow everything that has been promised. It's kind of a balancing act. It's kind of there's dissonance here, but there's a greater consonance that we can trust in. So back to Witherington. Is that computer still not coming on? Did you try the power button on the computer? Yeah, you did. Okay. Well, Witherington says, if God does not tempt us or send temptations, what does he send? And the answer is good gifts. The imagery here draws on Genesis and the first creation. And what specifically? Light being brought out of darkness. I'll probably just have to have Bill send out a link to this little video that I made. I didn't make it, but I...
Just give us a sense of how important it has been historically for people to understand the opening bits of the story in terms of its flow moving forward and backwards and all of that.
Well, an easy starting point is day one. And in day one, there's the Ruach Elohim, the spirit wind of God, Merachefet, hovering, moving, brooding over the surface of the waters. And then God says, be light, and there is light. And then it says that God saw that the light was good. And then God takes the light, separates the light, brings the light out of the darkness. So we're now in this beautiful moment where the question is, where is the light? Well, when Abba is seeing that it's good. But it turns out that the light is in the darkness. This then becomes one of the core ideas. And when one can see it, one will actually see it pulsating through the text. Now, just real quick, God is seeing that the light is good, the light is in the darkness, then takes it out of the darkness, but we aren't necessarily talking about a kind of emanating light because the sun, moon, and stars aren't created till day 4. So then the sort of underneath all this is, what is the light of day 1? Well, big conversation. I'm going to kind of just leave it sort of hanging there. But we're trying to understand how this idea moves through the text. So the word for light is or, and the word for darkness is hoshech. And the first time that is used is, of course, in day 1. And then the very next time those words show up together, or in that exact form, and choshech in that exact form, is in Exodus chapter 10, verses 21 through 23, which is the...
9th plague.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Is the 9th plague. And there's darkness over the whole land of Egypt, but light in the Israelites' dwellings. And of course, I'm going to suggest if it was firelight or oil lamp light, then of course it could have been in the Egyptians' dwellings as well. No, we're talking about a different kind of light.
Yeah.
A light more like the light of day 1. And there's light in the Israelites' dwellings, darkness over the whole land of Egypt. Well, if you kind of visualize that for a moment, there's darkness and there's light in the darkness. Well, that's the exact visual of day 1.
Right.
There's light in the darkness. And we know from reading Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 and 4, God will see the light in the darkness, and then he will draw it forth. Well, it's the 9th plague.
Yeah.
Ergo, what is about to happen? The light that's in the darkness, meaning the Israelites, are about to be drawn forth out of Egypt. And and then it won't be surprising that in the book of Revelation, one of the great closing themes is the nature of or, light, to hoshech, darkness,
right.
And that will, the ultimate fulfillment that resides in the vision in the book of Revelation is that there will be a light with no darkness.
Right.
As compared to a darkness where the light is hidden in it. And then there's all these touch points along the way, like Isaiah 45, verse 3. There are treasures hidden in darkness, which is a big clue about how to think about the light. And on another level, you could think about so many passages in New Testament when Jesus comes to town, and people will say, oh, don't bother about those folks. They're just like sinners, or like they're filled with demons, or whatever. And no, Jesus will see the light in the darkness, and then he'll promptly proceed to draw the light out of the darkness.
Yeah.
So, in other words, we're talking about seeing trajectory themes moving through the text. And why does the book of Revelation end the way it ends? Well, I would argue because Genesis chapter 1 begins the way it begins.
Yeah.
The result is that believers are already a sort of first fruits of God's new creation. We are part of the light that's being drawn out of the darkness. There is going to be a difficult to parse dissonance and consonance that we're not going to have the entire picture on as we look at ourselves and look at each other mid-creation. We don't run around saying that dissonance is consonance, but we do have meekness. The meekness to trust that even if we are disagreeing about something, we are going to be part of this light that is still being drawn out. Now, I am being intentionally vague because I want us to wrestle with this principle, not get lost over a play on a soccer field, right? I'm not interested in arguing about whether a particular play on the soccer field got called wrong or not. I want us to understand that there is a bigger lens here. If everybody wants to talk about a soccer play, we can make a special time for that, and the old sanctuary can be host to banging out that question. I'm going to skip through some things in the interest of time. Verse 19 in James chapter 1 is where I would recommend that you pick up. I'm not going to read this now. We're running really short on time. So I'm going to skip through all this. If you're interested, go read the second half of James 1 and see how it mirrors the first part. So all I'm going to say to wrap things up today is that we know James presupposes a particular view of God. This is something that we have to struggle for. We have to struggle to define this view of God. What is it? And he invokes this language of Genesis, of drawing light out of darkness. We know that our characters are not yet complete, except for Tom. Not from our perspective as time-bound mortals, but we have to have this faith wholly committed to this idea that we are already reborn and part of a new world. That's a dissonance too, but it's not the kind of dissonance that we have to get rid of. It's the kind of dissonance that we have to live with. It's the kind of dissonance that we have to have faith in, even though it exists and we don't necessarily understand it. We are the first fruits of this light that's being brought forth. This is what God is doing. This is the story of the Bible. So I'm going to leave you with this idea. Yes, light being brought out of darkness is a kind of dissonance or even paradox. But it makes sense because God can do whatever he wants. And he loves us. And he's committed to our redemption and our reconciliation. And this is the whole point of God creating something brand new and something that we're a part of. So believing this big picture lens, even though we don't have every little answer, it enables us to live by this larger perspective truth. Now, raise your hand if you like the idea of me explaining one more time the difference between a narrow lens and a wide lens. Or keep your hand down if you want to go to lunch. Oh man, I'm sorry. It turns out that the lunch people have it. Only 2 people wanted to hear. This was a Democratic vote. So Adam, come on up, and I'll be happy to send folks the rest of this sermon if you're interested. Thank you.